Okay, I'll start by introducing our panel. I don't know that most everybody probably knows our panel, but I saw some bios and I said, gee, I'm pretty impressed with this. I'm Mike Shagru, developer, Stone Leaf Companies from Gun Barrel City, mainly do rural stuff. At the far end is Janine Sisak, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of DMA Development. She's got 15 years experience in the development and ownership of affordable housing, manages projects throughout the housing tax credit program as well as a variety of HUD programs. As General Counsel for DMA, she handles all legal matters for the firm and manages partnership and loan closings and refinances. Additionally, she handles all asset management responsibilities for DMA. Pretty busy girl. Prior to joining DMA, Jean was an employment law associate for Paul Hastings, Janofsky, and Walker LLP in New York. We can forgive her for that. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Tufts, where she graduated cum laude in, well, I won't say when.
I'm a millennial.
Yeah.
Me too.
So her attention span has already expired. I don't know why I'm reading.
Are we done yet?
Wait, what?
Rishon Lezion, Israel. How about that? That's pretty impressive.
Pretty cool.
Yeah,
Currently serves on the board of directors of TAP and is the chair of the QAP committee. So very appropriate that she would be here, as well as the board of two Austin-based nonprofits, Generous Art Texas Inc. and Rosewood Senior Housing Inc. So we'll have her. Next to her is Tom Gurris, Deputy Executive. His is a lot shorter. You know that?
He's just been around the block.
Yeah, he's been around the block a few times. He's Deputy Executive Director of Asset Analysis and Management at TDHCA. Tom joined TDHCA in 1997 as manager of underwriting, and since then has managed the analysis of over $10 billion in real estate transactions. Probably a deal or two for some people in the room. Before TDHCA, Tom, interesting word he put in his bio, cultivated 8 years of bank lending experience. I don't know how you cultivate the lending experience unless you're growing some money in your own pockets or something. I don't know. Most notably with Bank One as a lender workout specialist and as a lending consultant with Alex Sheshinoff Management Services. In his current role in the department, he oversees the real estate analysis, program services, asset management, and bond finance groups. And it says here he is running back office program. We know of the back office program. Functions and securing financial viability for the department's housing programs. He received his MBA from University of Texas at Austin, and undergraduate degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Go Badgers.
Go Badgers, there you go. Do they still play football up there?
They do. Watch out, they're a sleeper this year.
They're a sleeper. Most years they're sleeping.
Well,
All right. Then right next to me is Marnie Holloway. She's a director of Multifamily Finance Division, joined TDHCA in May of 2009 in a neighborhood stabilization program. She moved to her current position in September 2015, where I'm sure someone twisted her arm. Then she stepped up, however, where she's responsible for the oversight of the department's multifamily finance allocation and award process for multiple fund sources. She has more than 15 years experience in real estate finance and affordable housing production. She attended St. Edward's University. So thank you all for being here. That's very nice. And Jeanine has 4 basic topics that we're going to cover. But as usual, I tend to start most of these out. I need to tell a little story. Sometimes they're off color, but my wife's in the room, so I have to clean it up a little bit. But since we're all here in the South, and most of us are from the South, I have a story about this old boy who bought a raffle ticket for a bass boat, and he won. But he lived inland very, very far, and he takes the boat home, and his wife says, what are you going to do with that boat? He says, well, I'm going to keep it. She says, we're about 100 miles from the nearest body of water where you could ever fish. Why would you keep it? He says, I won the boat, I'm keeping my boat. So he hauls it out in the middle of a hayfield, and he go out there and sit in his boat. Well, his brother came to visit him and goes out and says, hey, where's Freddie? He said, well, he's out in the field in his boat. He says, what? He goes out and sees him out there, and he stands at the field and yells at him, says, hey, Freddie, what do you think you're doing? He says, man, I'm fishing. He says, you know, It's people like you who give people like us a bad name for being from the South. And if I could swim, I'd come out there and kick your ass. All right.
Good one.
I'm using that one next week. That's gonna be my joke of the week. Good.
Okay, so at least everybody's still awake. That's good. All right, so Janine, let's talk about the 4 topics, and we'll start with that, and then we can come in. And by the way, if you have questions, raise your hand, and hopefully one of us will acknowledge it and let you ask your question as you go, because sometimes if you save all your questions to the end, they're no longer applicable, or you forget them. If you're old like me, you forget them all the time. But Janine, how about starting us off?
Sure. So I thought that the 4 topics that have generated the most discussion in the roundtables, and maybe I'll just mention the 4 topics and then we'll back up a little bit and I'll let Marnie kind of explain the new process TDHCA has implemented this year to get ideas more fleshed out earlier in the season with the goal of coming up with a draft QAP that we could all comment on politely earlier in the season, so we could all comment politely and move on with our business and find good sites that can score competitively. But since Mike turned it over to me, I was thinking today we could talk about high opportunity as one of the topics, educational excellence, new takes on, we haven't figured out what we're going to call it yet, deconcentration, dispersion, new point incentives to kind of get us closer into urban areas. And then the 4th, we can talk about some of the new, I don't know what we call it, underwriting guidelines or readiness to proceed, or what? Feasibility. Financial feasibility. There were some things in the roundtable handout from, I guess, 2 Fridays ago that are definitely worth discussing, especially with TDHCA staff listening attentively. So those are the 4 topics, but let's step back and pass it over to Marnie, and we can talk a little bit about the process this year and how it's been different, and maybe some timing goals with regard to having things in writing that we can comment on.
All right, so what we've been doing, for those of you who don't know, I know a number of you have been to the sessions, but on the Wednesday afternoon before board meetings, just about every month we've held, we're calling them roundtables or planning sessions about the QAP. I have come to call them group therapy. Because we seem to spend a lot of time talking about how this part of the QAP doesn't work, or this part doesn't work, and changes that folks would like to see in it. Part of what's come out of that is that there are a number of ideas that have kind of percolated up. One of them is the menu option for opportunity. We're taking a look at that, and then also some of the stuff that we're talking about with education have come out of those meetings. They've also been a really good opportunity for us to have a more informal conversation, because otherwise it's, we're standing up in front of the board, or we're going through a formal, comment and response sort of process, and we don't have an opportunity to just talk about it. So that has been really valuable for me. We will be continuing those meetings. Even as we get the QAP drafted and posted for comment, there's still a lot more to talk about. There are things to talk about for the next year. There are things to talk about the application process. There's still a lot of conversations that we need to have as a community in order to make this work a little better. We have sort of an internal draft at this point that we're handing back and forth and working on, trying to finalize it, distill it down a little bit. I am hoping that next week we can start to put up on forum just chunks of it. These are the parts that are changing. These are our thoughts. What do you think of this? What's your input? Did we miss something? Should we add something else? I'm hoping that we're going to be able to do that next week. And so y'all will start to be able to actually see the results of the work that we've all done. So,
And then possibly by the next board meeting, the 25th of August.
I would really like to have something for the meeting before the 25th board meeting. Yeah.
And then our typical timeline then kicks in so that at the September meeting, we'd have the official staff draft that the board would then consider and be able to approve for us to then be out for public comment. And then through the rest of the process, we get that public comment and finalize the QAP in November.
So as compared to last year, we will see excerpts of the QAP in advance. If you compare year to year, we'll be seeing something in writing that's more fleshed out because of all of the roundtables and the discussions and the ideas that have percolated up. We'll see something in writing, we think, earlier than we typically see it. And whenever we do see it, we'll be more vetted, vetted by people that have been coming to the roundtable. So I think all of you, a lot of you in the room have been very involved in the roundtable discussions, and I feel like, TAP is a big tent organization. There's a lot of differing views, but with my involvement in the roundtable and with the QAP committee, I think there's a lot this year that we can agree on, and I feel like we're making some good progress in opening up new areas to competition. And we've been working with the advocates along this process, which I think has been helpful in moving the ball forward moving it forward instead of sideways or backwards, which we sometimes do. So I'm very pleased with the process, and I think thanks staff and again everybody. All the stakeholders that have been involved. So with that note, let's start with high opportunity. So I think maybe the best way to proceed is just for some newbies in the room, I'm going to give a brief synopsis of how it's been working, how this topic has been working under the previous QAP, and some of the iterations of new ideas, and then I'll let Marnie and Tom comment on kind of where they are today or where they think it's going to land in the excerpts or the next draft when we see it. So starting with high opportunity, the way that it's worked the last couple years is you need to be in the first quartile or second quartile in terms of income based on census tract. So this is all census tract based. First quartile had the highest points category, second quartile was the second highest score under high opportunity. But in both those scenarios, you needed to be in a census tract with less than 15% poverty, and you needed to have an elementary school that had met standard and had an index rating of, I believe, a 77. There's been a lot of talk in the roundtables about how just the overlaying poverty, such a low threshold for poverty on income, and then layering on schools has resulted in census tracts that kind of light up on your map. Says, "Wow, if I can get a site there, I'm gonna have a perfect score and I can win a tiebreaker." Maybe we talk about tiebreakers a little bit too as a fifth topic. So what was happening? Well, a couple things were happening. First of all, a lot of developers were kind of literally fighting over the same sites, and that was driving up prices. We were seeing smaller communities that had never had a tax credit deal before have four or five developers trying to get their foot in the door in that community. And then we're also seeing a lot of deals in high opportunity areas. Did my mic just go out? There it is. In high opportunity areas that were on the fringes of cities. So last year in particular, if you kind of look at the allocation log, I don't think there's a Dallas deal that's going to receive funding. I don't think there's an Austin deal that's going to receive funding, and I think there's one Houston deal. So we're also trying to kind of address the kind of the black holes that are in the cities, and that's y'all know it's both high opportunity and schools that are causing that dynamic. So. A lot of ideas have been vetted in the roundtables, and I think just conceptually the idea that's firming up right now is some sort of combination of an income and poverty threshold with the ability to pick up points based on, what I call good real estate attributes. So that is kind of the concept that we're working on, and I'll let Tom and Marnie kind of comment on the specifics of that in their current vision.
Tom is stepping on your microphone.
Yeah. Which is better than stepping on her toe.
Yeah. So,
Sorry.
you know, we're all a little giddy back at TDHCA
It's the
right
end of the
now.
cycle.
It's, yeah. So as Jenny mentioned, regarding poverty rate, this is something that we're looking really closely at. And we're also looking at it at the sub-region level. Rather than trying, just like everything else, Texas is this huge state, so trying to, apply this sort of blanket measurement all the way across the state is really difficult. So we're looking at that, we're researching it, we're taking a look at, census tracts that are in or out with different scenarios and trying to get to, a high opportunity area, but not being so strict that, everybody's focused on that one pinpoint. So beyond poverty level, we're talking about two potential thresholds to start for opportunity points. The first one would be the first two income quartiles. The other one, and this is something that we've talked about in all of the roundtables, is a third quartile census tract contiguous to a first or second quartile census tract without a physical barrier in between. So without a highway or a river or something, recognizing that census tracts, opportunity doesn't just end at this line that's been put on a map. And then with the development site that's still fairly close to that boundary. My thinking is that this should help. I'm hoping we still need to look at some mapping, but help with that donut hole effect that we're seeing in some of the rural communities. You want to talk about the stuff we're adding?
So we'll continue to have prioritization for the first quartile. There'll be a higher, so there's a menu of items after those first two threshold things, and the highest menu item would be that highest quartile. And then there'd be points for the next quartile, the second quartile. But then there'd be a series of points for other attributes like proximity to parks and proximity to employment, potentially proximity to public transportation. Each of those would be individual point items is the idea, so that you could combine a series of those to make up for being in the second quartile or in the third quartile next to a first or second quartile.
Tom, is that going to make the second quartile score evenly with the first quartile, but there's enough menu to catch up?
Yeah, they're not necessarily going to be, well, first and second, I think are right now,
on the
they're
same
thinking
The
about
same,
even, but
the same.
we may adjust that as well. But they'll be close enough in proximity so that all the other attributes could help get you to the same level. So that there's not so much demand on that one perfect site, but there are many things that make up a good site. So we're still trying to flesh out what are those other attributes. I think we have on there a crime rate statistic that I know is fairly controversial. We'd like to have some sort of benchmark there that says, if you're in a lower crime area, that's a benefit. Whether that crime is a difficult thing to measure perfectly across all areas, and we understand that. But if we have what we think is as good a uniform measurement as we can, and it's a low thing, then you could get a point for that. But if you can't, then there are other things you can get points for. And you only have to get to 7 points. The other thing that Janine mentioned about tiebreakers is that this list of extra activities would also then go and be fleshed out in the tiebreaker scenario, so that if we do have a tie and one site has, just enough to get to 7 points, but another one has enough to get to 9 points, but they can only claim 7 points, then they'd win the tiebreaker because they have more of these attributes at that tiebreaker level.
Right. So the concept behind this is to get sites that not only provide high opportunities under the way that we've decided to determine that in past years, but also require connectivity. I mean, some of the other amenities, and For those of you that have been at the roundtables, you've seen or heard many different lists of amenities, but I think that the list that that we're talking about now satisfies the two criteria that have been voiced as important, and that is, are these amenities indicative of high opportunity areas, and are they also amenities that a typical tax credit resident would use? So, we're looking at things like public libraries, public parks, playgrounds, transit, jobs, really robust amenities that, in my opinion, to have that also serve as a tiebreaker is a really great way to break ties as opposed to right now, which is the lowest poverty rate, which in talking to some of my developer colleagues was actually something that people searched for. And it was that tiebreaker factor was often leading people to the same site in the same census tract or the same town if it's one or two census tracts. So I think we're headed in the right direction there. I think there's a huge opportunity for TAP membership to get involved, especially with that amenities list. In terms of poverty, I know on the handout at the last roundtable we were talking about either a mean or a median poverty rate based on a subregion, and we at DMA ran those numbers, and some places benefited and some places lost in a way that I didn't feel like we were actually picking up new census tracts, which I think is really important. When I say picking up new census tracts, I don't mean picking up any census tracts. I mean picking up other good high opportunity areas or mixed income neighborhoods that, for instance, for those of you that live in Austin and you hear me speak a lot, I always mention Miller. The Miller redevelopment is second quartile for income, but the poverty rate is over 15%, so it gets 0 for high opportunity index. North Burnett is the same. Travis Heights wouldn't get opportunity index points. So, we're trying to kind of capture some of those mixed income neighborhoods that are considered high opportunity. In recent discussions with the staff, because we do feel like indexing poverty on a subregion basis is better, we're now looking at, or staff is now looking at, and I haven't had a chance to run the numbers, instead of having a fixed poverty cutoff, a mean or a median, treating poverty in terms of a quartile analysis.
Well, actually, I think we're looking at that, but particularly for this scoring item, more of a quartile analysis. But I think we're also looking at changing the fixed rate and using a kind of a combination of a fixed rate or the median in the subregion. We had toyed with the idea of doing an index where every subregion would be someplace between 15% and 35%, and we just tried to figure out what the relative poverty rate would be to fit along that line. And I think that's going to be, while doable, more difficult to explain, seeing as I see already a bunch of confused looks in the audience. So I think we're heading now probably closer to a revised fixed with a combination that's a little bit that provides
the greater of.
Greater of, yeah.
The greater of,
and
great.
By sub-region, not by region. So we may actually, there may be a couple of sub-regions that lose a little bit, but most sub-regions will gain a lot, is where we are right now, as far as the number of census tracts.
Right, and we just need to be sensitive to picking up census tracts in the right places.
Right.
In those, in my opinion, in more urban, connected areas.
Right. So one of the things when you look at the fixed percentage of poverty in an area is to try to find studies that support where it becomes a non-high opportunity area or a difficult area to live in. And the studies we've seen so far kind of give us a range of 15% is what we've used in the past to 20% as being kind of on the borderline of then becoming an area that's maybe of concern. The idea, I think, is that if it's an area of concern but it has these other attributes, maybe it's a lesser of concern. So we're still doing some research to see if we can figure out what makes the most sense as a threshold for poverty, and that would then become undesirable feature of the site.
It's over.
If it's over that
Yeah.
threshold, and then you'd have to explain that and help us understand why we would still want to do a transaction in that community. Different than the point part of it, but kind of related.
Right. So we are talking in the range of 15 to 20%. HUD neighborhood standards uses 20%. I think the statewide average is 18%. So we're talking about small percentage changes here, but it makes a big difference. I mean, even y'all know, people who are trying to develop in Texas, if we could have, 20 good new census tracts in an urban area that would qualify, that would be a victory, and it wouldn't, in my opinion, take away from housing choice and housing opportunity for our residents. So I think we're making some progress there. It's really hard to talk about these ideas. They all sound really good. But Texas is a very large and very diverse state. So until we kind of see some of these ideas, put pencil to paper, and then really run the numbers. I mean, some of the things that we've run based on some of the ideas that have been discussed are coming up with results that are surprising. I thought that when the poverty at the round table was talked about in averages by region or sub-region, I thought that would help, and it didn't. So a lot of the results that we're finding are counterintuitive to a certain degree. So that's kind of where y'all are on high opportunity. The other, I think, huge...
The other thing that we're doing with Opportunity Index is adding the potential on concerted revitalization. If you are able to earn 4 points on opportunity attributes but you have a CRP site, you can gain another point on your CRP.
So it gives you the opportunity to kind of equalize for a CRP that's in a high opportunity area.
Or higher opportunity. It starts to, we're hoping it starts to bring in some of the areas that are gentrifying, that are starting, they're still under a revitalization plan, but that revitalization plan is working and these good things are happening, and that provides that scoring boost for that.
Right. And the other, I think, huge move on high opportunity is taking out educational excellence in terms of performance of the elementary school out of high opportunity, out of the high opportunity definition. And it's hard to kind of see what that looks like with the maps that we have access to and that we use. But my gut says that's going to make a huge difference. Now, good segue to educational excellence points. Although elementary school performance won't be a threshold, hopefully if it stays that way, under high opportunity, you're still going to have to compete for 5 points under educational excellence. And as you all know, I mean, you almost, in many regions, you almost have to get every single point, right, to compete. So it's not that schools won't be important. It won't be that we as developers aren't looking for sites with really good schools across the board. But again, we're trying to address this kind of funnel scenario that we're all running into right now under high opportunity. So I think it's a step in the right direction. I think there's a lot to talk about with educational excellence too. Still, and I'll highlight some of those issues, and Marnie and Tom and Mike can comment on them. One is just, generally, is there any opportunity to take, high school, if not high school, middle school and high school out of the scoring criteria? I don't think the staff agrees with this. I think they believe that, the quality of schools are an indicator of whether an area is high opportunity. Our response to that is, for those developers that have large portfolio of general population deals, we find, and other developers find, that most of the children that we serve are elementary age children. The hope being that tax credit housing and affordable housing enables our residents to step into home ownership by the time their children are older and are attending middle school and high school. So that's one issue. I don't think we'll make much traction there, but I'm going to continue to talk about it. The second issue is the larger school districts and choice programs, magnet schools, charter schools. I think the staff understands those issues. I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen for all the people in the room and staff on, how those programs work. I'm sure it works different in all the large districts. Tanya with TAP, the policy director, is going to try to help us do some research on that so we can all kind of get up to speed on that. So there's that issue and how we're going to fold that into the QAP. And then the third issue is the TA ratings, and they're changing. They're going to a letter grade system. How are we going to analyze that data? How are we going to average it? How are we going to pinpoint it for scoring? I mean, there's a lot going on there and a lot of question marks that I don't even think we can answer anytime soon.
Well, a couple of things. One is knowing that we're headed for this letter grade and we don't really know what the letter grades are going to mean, and we won't know until the end of the year. TEA isn't reporting until the end of the year. What I think we're moving to is using Index 1 or Index 2 scores. Those indexes that make up the scores currently will continue into the letter grades. So we're just going to key on those indexes. The other thing that we're looking at is, rather than using that statewide 77, is using the median for each educational service center. There are 20 of them across the state. So that starts, instead of having these measurements that are like, it's here for most everyone, but these other regions, it's this other number, really starting to localize what's going on with those educational accountability ratings.
And in fact, we were running numbers yesterday on trying to figure out how to try to get even more local by looking at school districts compared to the state service region, because that's one of the things we said we'd pursue. We kind of ran up against a little bit in that there are some large school districts, large city areas that have large school districts that are near other, schools. I mean, school districts. So they're right adjacent to each other, and one might have a 68 median score, and the other might have a 80. And so if we use the local school district score as a test, as the defining element for that school, you could have two schools that are right next to each other, one scoring 75 and one scoring 70, and you get more points for the 70 than the 75. So that doesn't really quite make sense for us. So I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to that level of detail with the going by school district median. Instead, we'll probably, like Marty said, we'll probably stick with the state service region that the TA puts out. So I think that'll get us pretty far along that road to make sure it's localized, but not so localized that it becomes difficult.
Well, my concern about that, I just feel like we need to figure something else out, because when you average schools based on a region, it's going to, again, I don't know if I haven't run the numbers on this, but my concern is that it's going to disadvantage the large city school districts to a point where they won't be competitive, and we'll see the same result as last year, especially in Dallas. I see Claire nodding her head. I think there's one, correct me, Claire, if I'm wrong, one Dallas high school that qualifies? One high school.
And it only meets the 5 points, so
That's new.
very iffy if it does.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas we talked about was, is there a different indexing we can use for school districts that have greater than X number of schools? I don't know what that number is. 700, I don't know, something like that. But I think there's still some work that needs to be done there, because I fear that if we do a regional average, it's gonna make it worse. The problem will be worse.
Don't we already kind of grade on a curve for the valley, so we could grade on a curve for the higher metropolitan areas?
There's actually, I think there's only 1 or 2 service centers that go over 77, and the rest of them are below. So, and we'll continue to work on those numbers, but it looks like there's more. We'd wind up with at least a few more schools because we'd be at that regional median. But that's something that we're going to continue to work on. And then once we get this up on the forum, any thoughts that y'all have about another way to look at it would be tremendous. The other thing that we're doing with education is we're adding the ability to gain another point. So if you're at 5 or 3, so you at those lower areas, for things like high school graduation rates, extended day, pre-K programs, those, just to be able to get from 5 to 6 or from 3 to 4 on your educational excellence if you have these other features in your attendance zone.
Marnie or Tom, do you want to talk about some of the concerns or challenges with folding in magnets and charters, and really the purpose of y'all talking about that is because I think staff's open to language and suggestions in this regard. I mean, everybody wants charter schools and magnets to count, but how do we do it, and what does it look like, and what is the language? So I'll tell you what their policy concerns are, and then I will accept emails with language from anyone who wants to offer it. And so will Marnie.
So those policy concerns are, is it available to everyone? Is that charter school, that exceptional school, available to everybody who might live at that in those apartments? And then is it do they have an open enrollment that there are positions in that school that are available? And then the second piece of that is there transportation available? Can they get there, or is it going to be on the other side of the city and they can't, they wouldn't be able to get access to those schools? So those are really the two big concerns about how we incorporate charter or those target schools. Anything else?
Nope, that would be it.
So if you guys have ideas on how we can get there with that language, we'd be excited to hear that. Do you want to talk about the thing that we haven't named yet? The
Yes.
urban infill sort of thingy?
Go for it.
So when we were meeting the other day, we were talking about understanding the concern, although our research team staff they really don't care for the term donut hole.
They really hate
don't.
that
Yeah,
term.
I got harassed pretty heavily yesterday when I kept using it. But there is this part of town that usually seems to be closer to the city center of the major metropolitan areas that often has a hard time hitting on all the cylinders for high opportunity and educational excellence and what have you. And yet there are some good tracks in those areas that still could benefit from affordable housing because it's got proximity to jobs and what have you. So the idea that we came up with is using some kind of a radius from the city center. And when we were thinking about what the city center would be, we'd think about like the city hall as the city center, because it's usually centrally located, maybe a 5-mile radius in regions where there's maybe over $4 million in allocation. So we're only talking about a few of the regions, looking at the largest cities in those regions in order to then kind of give ourselves the opportunity to see some of those tracks that otherwise have some strong attributes employment-wise and connectivity-wise, but maybe are struggling on a rebound with either poverty or schools or what have you, and they need some assistance. So providing a point incentive for that area. I said a lot of words. I don't know if I made any sense in saying it, but what we're looking at is a radius probably in the 4 or 5 major cities is what it would amount to. But we're still looking at how that fleshes out, and would love to get more comment about that. We don't want to make that a 5-mile radius around Dripping Springs or something like that, because obviously that wouldn't get us what we're looking at. We're looking at the big cities. So.
Right. And would that be in lieu of a certain point category, or in addition to? How would that work?
Well, it was sort of it fleshed from a deconcentration kind of idea that Tim had and we'd been working with to try to find sites that were further away from other sites. We had that in our tie-break scenario, and we still do, but Tim was thinking that we might want to work with something like that as a scoring criterion as we as it evolved and we talked, I think it felt like it would be a better thing to be something that it's not really deconcentrated, maybe more like urban infill kind of concept, or smart growth, or other words, language that we're not all
Right.
all excited about, but we're trying to come up with a name for it. But that's sort of the concept. That's where it came from.
Right, and we just need to look at those things in conjunction with underserved, which
Right.
still has point
Right.
advantages for being not near another tax credit. So,
Yeah, underserved is a good way of thinking about it, because that's sort of the idea, is that it's underserved. These are inner city or more centrally located, but not as well served, perhaps. And
So-
still potentially high scoring in other high opportunity activities.
Right. So, I mean, there's still some kind of work to do there, looking at it vis-a-vis underserved and with some of the tiebreakers. You guys all know the devil's in the details on these things, and you can have really good ideas, but until you kind of go through a round and see the either intentional or unintentional consequences, it's hard to really evaluate it. I mean, we're trying, we're all trying, we're all trying to, I'm trying to do maybe different things than Tom and Marnie and Tim are trying to do, but I think we're just trying to make the program better. We're trying to open up areas that need housing to be competitive, and we're trying to get back to good real estate. And so these are the things that I think we can all agree on, and there's different ways to get there and different tools that we use. And we're just doing our best.
Yeah.
I know a lot of this stuff. I mean, when it's out there, there's gonna be some people that disagree with a lot of this stuff for a variety of reasons. But we just all have to kind of look at it in terms of, what's good policy, what's good for our residents, and also what's good for us as a development community and getting deals done where they're wanted. And then for those of you that attended the legislative issues panel, I mean, there's work to do there too, which, when I was hoping for more wide sweeping changes in the QAP, someone said to me, well, if we get, state rep letters and city support gone, maybe, it's not as bad as it feels right now. And I do agree with that to a certain extent. So, we're going to kind of continue working on these issues, and, hopefully we'll get some relief. I mean, I just want it to be a little easier, I don't want sites to be slam dunks, but I want to have more opportunities in good neighborhoods with good schools.
I think you're right. I mean, I think good real estate for us is become more providing a good choice for potential residents. We focus a lot more on, are we providing enough good choice, so that schools are important, low crime is important, higher income job opportunities, what have you. So it's always, I think that's where we kind of fit together in that we're really looking at providing choice. So.
Yeah, and knowing that, the X and the Y of our current QAP pointing into one place, it just makes it really, really tough to do our jobs. There's a whole bunch of great sites out there and great neighborhoods,
right.
with good opportunities, and we just want to be able to serve those places, especially when we want to go to cities that want us, not cities that don't want us. So, I mean, that's the big challenge there. So talking about good real estate, I'm going to kick it back to Mike. Do you want to take on some of the ideas introduced at the Friday Roundtable about feasibility?
Yeah, some of the things that came up in the last handout, those of you who were there received it. From the development community standpoint, a lot of the issues, or a lot of the ideas, and these are just ideas, nothing's in concrete, that were thrown out, having completed plans. That's almost an impossibility, because it would cost a lot of money to get your plans done when you don't know if you're going to have a deal. Having zoning, I don't know, there are towns that have zoning in place, but if you need to change a zoning, A seller is not going to change the zoning, so you can have your zoning for an application. Sometimes you can get a subject to. All necessary permits, I don't know any town that'll give you a permit without a deal. What good's a permit if you don't score well and you don't move forward? I don't know how that works. Commitments for necessary financing and equity, I think that's important, even though those are all subject to, and we will have that. And one of them said certification of completion must be submitted within 30 days of receipt of fully executed commitment notice. I'm not sure what that means.
Well, and actually, we've changed up that section since that meeting, based
Okay.
on the conversations that were had in the room.
Want to go with concept of what the concept is first?
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
Let me do a little bit about the concept, and Marty can give you some more detail. The idea there is that if you have two sites, one is zoned and one isn't zoned, the likelihood that the one zoned is ready to proceed, can move their deal forward. There's one less piece of risk, right? The zoning's already approved. So the idea is, with all of these items, is to provide incentive, if it exists, to deals that are already ready to go. That does a couple things for us. It gets deals built hopefully quicker. It gets more certainty in what the feasibility of the deal is itself, because time kills deals because things happen. If you're short, if your time frame to get to closing is shorter, you're going to have a more likely higher chance of success. We used to have some of these criteria as threshold, and we did that for many years actually, and there was a lot of feedback on that's very difficult. As sites become more difficult, it's harder and harder to get to those sites, and so we kind of took them out and moved them to later in the process, and that had the effect of elongating the development time frame. And so some transactions, some developers are right on top of it right after they get an award. They're moving toward getting their commitments, getting things closed, getting getting through to their 10% test, what have you. And some developers are busy on their other deals, and so things are matriculating a little less quickly, and so then we get to the 10% test, which is the following year, and we still haven't closed, and we need an extension of that. And so all we're trying to do is provide an incentive, a small one, just a small point incentive for deals that are more ripe and more ready to go, because we're feeling like those have been vetted further. If they've been vetted further, they're probably better real estate. That's sort of the whole concept. There'd probably be maybe, I think right now we're looking at a total of 4 optional points here. Each one of these things would be 1 point, and there would probably be 6 or 7 different things you could choose from if your deal had these elements. Do you want to talk about what elements we're talking about now?
So building from what we discussed in the roundtable, zoning is still on there, as Tom mentioned. The other thing, other things, sufficiently developed plans and reviewed permitting requirements in order that you will commit to submit an application for permitting 60 days after your tax credit commitment. Another one is satisfied itself that it can meet all of lender or investor requirements, commits that if it receives an award, it will close on interim construction on or before. We haven't figured out what that day is. The other one is committing to not request an extension of 10% test. So these are commitments that you would be making at application about getting moving, getting started, getting rolling. Particularly if you're layering with direct loan funds, we are right now committing direct loans from the last round. And so it becomes a problem, an issue for us with recent HUD changes, that if we don't have those funds committed, we lose them. They're gone. It's not a cumulative thing anymore. So, particularly in that little part of our program, this readiness to proceed is just vital.
Maybe you do it for that portion of it, but I will say that unless we want to reuse or recycle plans, and even though we have a plan that may work on multiple sites, it may not be the best plan for that site, but if we're creating a new plan for a new site, the architect to get it done in 60 days so we can be ready to close in a short period of time. I believe that most of us do want to close as fast as possible because time is money, and the sooner we get in the ground, the sooner it's better for us. However, having plans ready to go, and I don't have an issue about, in our due diligence with towns, we always talk about permitting. We want to make sure there's not a permit issue. But nobody's going to issue us permits until they see completed plans and site plans, et cetera. So we've got to go through their P&Z process, which may not be able to be done in a period of X or Y. But I do understand and have empathy. If you've got money that has to go out the door, use it or lose it. There has to be a way, and if I want to apply for that, I better be ready to go. But if I'm not applying for that, the window should be a little larger.
Well, and that could be, and it could be that, you know, we get this up on the forum and, you know, some of you have thoughts about, you know, should the time period be a little different? Should the measurement be different? You know, this is concepts that we're putting out there.
And I think there, you know, the idea too is not to have things that everybody can get the point necessarily for. It's those that are really, you know, if you chunked a bunch of money into plans and somehow you're going to move forward with this deal anyway, and you know it converts to a bond deal if you don't do that or whatever, and you're moving forward, you've probably sunk a lot of money into it, and having some more certainty in your ability through the scoring process might be a good thing, and that's sort of the other part of what we're trying to get
The
to.
application alone sinks a bunch of money. You know.
Right, but if you sunk the extra in there, I mean, we're not looking for people
I
to sink
understand.
more money, and don't get me wrong, I'm not, it's not
Yeah.
what we're trying to do at all.
I mean, without a show of hands, I'm feeling confident that TAP QAP committee will not support this new scoring item. I mean, I cannot get behind some of this for different reasons. One, to give point advantages for sites that are zoned multifamily is just going to increase competition dramatically for those sites. I agree with Mike that, you know, permitted set of plans is going to give an advantage to really large developers that do architecture and engineering in-house and do cookie cutter product. And I could editorialize further, but I just think it's bad policy. I think, as Mike said, we are sufficiently self-incentivized to get these deals over the closing line as quickly as possible.
You'd be surprised. You know, you'd be surprised. We are seeing more and more transactions needing extensions and things not getting done. And it's a small number of folks, but we should be we need to figure a way to provide more incentive the other direction, whatever that is. I just
Right.
It's a constant battle for us.
Right.
But Tom, I'm not sure we should make a major change for a small problem.
Well-
If it's a small problem, we need to address that problem. But don't put me in the same position with somebody who has to have an extension every time they turn around.
So-
If I can get my stuff done, but Joe Blow can't, why would I have to play in the same sandbox with Joe Blow? Because it might be dirty.
Yeah, so let me ask this question. Let me ask this question. How many of y'all have been in the program for 10 years or more? Raise your hand. So of those of you that have been in the program 10 years or more, how many of you had to meet the 10% test by the year end of the year that you got an award when you had allocations like that? Just a couple of you. Come on, raise your hands. Raise them high, tall and proud, high and proud, wherever that goes. And it was doable, right? Yeah. Now, how many of you that have done that have had to ask for extensions of the July date that's 6 months later? And why is that? What's happened? What's changed in the world that has caused that to happen?
In the USDA world, acquisition of the property.
Okay.
That wasn't required back.
It's literally in the USDA component, because you had interagency issues. For example, we use the home funds, the direct loan funds, and USDA may come up and say, have a conflict with this in regards to what that loan is. And give you the long periods of dialogue, and you know exactly what I'm talking about.
So-
It forces you to ask for extension, and we literally hate it, because as you said, we would get it done before the end of the year.
Right. And so with USDA, we've got some things that we're trying to work with to address that situation. So is there anybody that was able to meet the 10% test in December back 10 years ago, but hasn't been able to meet it in July now?
That is not USDA.
That is not USDA. it's doable is what I'm saying. I think everybody, now, does anybody meet it in December, or do I wait till July anyway? Because we can, right?
Well,
So I figured
10% test is different. I mean, cost cert, we've asked for extensions for cost cert oftentimes because our accountant has so much work. You know, I mean, some of this stuff you get extensions because you can't
Yeah.
control, because of third-party work,
Right.
because
And-
you can't kind of
and
control the pace of that.
Right,
Pace
and-
of that.
And extensions of cost cert, submitting the documentation, we regularly deal with and address. It's the extension of placed in service that really is a result of extensions of the 10% test and extensions of, get started later, get closed later. It's a problem for us because, there are certain things we can extend and we, want to see deals get done, and so we're always willing to try to figure out how to help get deals get done. But the place in service deadline is a cliff, and we've even tried to create mechanisms to address that, but it's a cliff, and it's a really ugly cliff. And
Yeah, but
we don't like
we
being
suffer
faced with that.
we suffer the
well,
consequences.
this is one area where we're all sort of, yes, financially for sure, but we suffer it too. If we can't
Right.
reuse the credits, we suffer it too, just because it's a bad spot to have
Right.
any developer in.
And with the
And we
10%
don't-
test, if people, and I'm just talking out loud, I don't
Sure,
know if
sure,
this
me
is the
too.
case, but it takes, in the major cities, it takes 6 months, 8 months to get site development permits. A lot of this stuff is, you have to close your transaction to spend, and now we're buying really expensive sites. We are paying historically high construction pricing. So the 10% amount is probably 5 times what it was 10 years ago. And so these deals get inherently more risky, which as a developer, you're less likely to take on that risk. So you push back buying your land. And that's why people get 10% extensions.
But good real estate will get you there too, right? So if we're encouraging folks to buy good real estate, at any rate,
Yeah,
we can
we'll-
go back and forth all
we'll
day.
talk about it.
What we're looking for is ways to either incentivize or kind of give folks that are able to get things done quicker, give them some encouragement to do that, however that works. And
Well,
we're open to ideas.
Janine just touched on something that would lead to my next point, and maybe it's been changed, and that is about the cost of development per square foot, and to get points to be less than the median price of the previous year. With the labor shortage and the fact that it's in my world, we're paying more, it appears. The guys cutting down trees aren't doing it any cheaper. I don't know where we get less costs based on a previous year's cost for a product 2 years out, because even though we get an award now, we're not buying most of the material unless we buy it for 10% test until we need it to take to a job site. So that time lag, there's many opportunities for price increases. So to say we should do it for less?
Yeah, that was a typo. What we were trying to
Bad
do
typo.
is bad, really bad typo. You're right, really bad typo. I was just wondering what you were talking about, but then I just
Yeah,
read what
no,
it said,
it's-
and
yeah.
it was intended to be less than a range of the either last year's or this year's applications. A couple years ago, we tried that with the current year application cycle, and not with the then current year application cycle, where we looked at all the costs for that year and took the product and then compared you to that like product, and as long as you're within the mean, then within so much of a range of the mean of that, then you got the points. The idea there is, it kind of going to what you said, Mike. It's really hard because what we're supposed to be doing is looking at historical costs and then doing some sort of a adjustment to it to say this is what the cost per square foot, criteria should be. It's difficult to do that because different labor markets are different cost increases are different, and so what we really want to do is try to create a box that is big enough so that most everything fits in, and that only things that are really extraordinarily different for some unexplainable reason are out, and give everyone more encouragement not to target whatever the number was this year, 75 or whatever the number is, because if the target is if the number is 75 to get the points, we see a lot of 74.99, and we know that's just not, you know.
Well, that's how we do it. We
Yeah.
put 74.99, take square footage back into
Yeah,
it. Here's my
right.
cost.
Well,
This is
then-
what I have to, this is what I have allowed to spend. Now,
then-
but wait a minute. When I spend 75 instead of, or 75.99, that rest of that jingle comes out of my jeans. I don't come back saying I need some more credits.
No, what, this is what actually happens. So, so there are other cushions in the cost criteria that are used, that are expanded, so that the credit can still stay there, and there's a hunk of deferred developer fee that's reflected, and syndication prices that are indicated in the application are understated, and interest rates are, so all these things get jabberwockied so that you can have the room to do what you need to do, which is just because we
I don't
targeted
disagree.
$75, which
I don't
doesn't make any
disagree on
sense.
some of that, but we only wish that our syndication prices are always understated. We
Yeah,
have to go
yeah,
based on
got it,
history.
got it.
We understand this year, there's been a bump more so than I anticipated, I will say that, and a deal that may have been tighter is, I'm gonna have more room in. I understand that. However, I don't know what my total costs are gonna be yet because I haven't bought my lumber out. Until I buy my labor and lumber, I really don't know how much more room I have. Historically, in my mind, I think, hey, this is a good deal. By the time we get CO'd and do our cost cert, I might say, what the hell happened here? And, you know, I may not have the room that I thought I had. So, I mean, and I don't think we're trying to game the system when we do that. I think we too, I would say every person in this room wants to do good real estate.
Right, right.
None of us want to
Nobody wants to
get a
use
little
money.
developer fee and be out of business next year.
So one of the ideas that we talked about in our working group is going to a scenario where the cost per square foot limitation would limit your credits. It would limit your credits. And if it doesn't limit your construction costs or your hard costs or your building costs, and so under this scenario, you could put your real building costs, your real hard costs, but you could only claim credits up to a certain dollar amount. And we think we can draft something that satisfies statute, which, as we discussed, we have differing opinions on how and why that got in the statute. But we're looking at a scenario. I mean, if your costs are $100 a square foot, you're only getting credits on $80 a square foot. You know, you provide sources that you know, make your development whole, and it's not over leveraged, and you're fully covered. Then, you know, no harm, no foul. You have to provide commitment. You know, you have to provide commitments for whatever soft funds that you're using to bridge that gap. But we think that there's a possibility there to treat this more as a credit limitator than a reflection of what your actual costs are. Because I think we can all agree that the system that we're currently operating on does not necessarily result in
Right.
Real-
That is
real costs. I mean, that's what the agency, and I am very empathetic that, you know, Brent struggles with, you know, are these real costs? And I think the other part of that, you can't really look at cost per square foot without looking at that leveraging point category. Because I think what happens is, to get the leveraging point, you maybe have to, you know, people end up padding their numbers outside hard costs. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen when you're throwing together an application at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 days before the deadline.
But I'm glad that you pointed out that we're not trying to get you to go less than the existing cost. Good point.
Right.
So there's still some work to do on that, and we would love to get that language so we can.
Let me ask another question that was in that handout, and it's serving more of the lowest income tenants. We don't have a problem serving more, but the issue is that goes back to the economic feasibility. If I have to do more 30% units and get less rents, that's only tightening my deal up. If there's a way to offset it, and I also, in combination with this, the rural regions that only get $500,000, while you can ask for 1.5 times that, it's not necessarily the brightest thing unless you don't think anybody else is applying, because you have to give up a point, and these are won or lost by a point. Can there be some offset? If you want to serve more lower income tenants, is there a way that we can see a benefit on this side to help provide those tenants? Like increase the 500 to 550 or something if you're serving more lower income tenants.
Yeah, I'm going to flex to a different answer because I'm not sure. always trying to maximize the number of low-income tenants we can fit into a deal safely is obviously something we want to try to do, but we don't want to try to overburden transactions so that they're not infeasible. And that's a real, coming from an underwriting background, that's a real hard thing for me to get to the right balance of. But some of the other attributes that we haven't mentioned yet that we're trying to add to that might play into this as far as serving the tenants is services for tenants and trying to build a better list of what tenant services might look like that might be more beneficial for tenants. We've had a lot of conversation about the idea of some kind of a supportive service coordinator for that's on site that might provide the ability, but not the mandatory requirement that tenants have to get access to other supports in the community, so that a single mom who needs to get daycare can get help from a service coordinator that might know of how to get them into the daycare, how to get them transportation to daycare, how to connect them with whatever other services in the community that might help that mom get those kids to where they need to be.
And you know, some of
things
those
like
services are easier provided in a 100 to 150 unit deal than they are in a 50 unit.
Right.
I mean, having that extra payroll, it can really burden a small deal.
Sure.
And in those regions I was just talking about that don't have a large enough credit base, we're forced to do smaller deals, and we don't want to overburden them. I'd rather serve lower income tenants and try to provide, and we provide services, but then have another payroll, you know.
Right, and so that's been part of the, I mean, what we need a little bit of help with is that exact conversation, because I think originally we thought, well, it won't be meaningful unless it's on sites paid for by the property. I mean, still, it's going to have to be funded by the property, but maybe it's not a full-time gig, or maybe it's a collaboration with some meaningful service provider in the community that's already providing those services that can come in. You provide space for them and some compensation for their time, but not as a full-time. But your residents get full-time access to them when they're in other places. So we're looking at ideas like that, so that, you know, it's more an enriched, service-enriched kind of environment for folks.
Well, I know it's 5 minutes to the appointed hour, and I know we need to leave some time for some other questions, and there are a lot more of the services we could talk about, and that's transportation, et cetera. But I think we need to make sure that y'all have the opportunity to ask questions, especially of Tom and Marnie, while we have them here. If you've been to many of the QAP panels, you've had the opportunity to ask some, but if there are questions that you have or other questions that have come up after today's conversation, please feel free to ask those right now, please.
How are ETJ sites or Houston?
That's part of what we're trying to figure out.
So we'd have to come up with some kind of equivalency to a zoning that, for Houston, you know, have gone through some of the planning and be able to move forward with some similar speed. For places where there's no zoning, like ETJs or in Houston, how would you evaluate zoning?
On your second criteria, I thought I heard you say submit for building permits within 60 days. Or did you say have permits within 60 days?
Submit what it says right now, we'll submit a complete application for permitting.
So that's just submitting your plan 60 days after your
Yeah, that means your plans, you have to be ready to go into P&Z within 60 days, which could be a burden, depends upon how fast your architect works.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with a guy that specializes in affordable housing, he's got 10 deals, you expect to pay more to be the first out the door. So now you're going to add some cost to your deal.
Or maybe it needs to be a different measure. You know, again, this is, just because I'm sitting here saying it doesn't mean that it's going to be in the QAP.
Yeah, these are discussions,
Okay.
and the last thing I was going to say, and I'll say it as the last thing, but you had a question.
Yeah, I was just curious where staff is. We talked a lot about educational excellence, where we are in terms of how that effectuates senior deals and aging in place. Can you give an update on that right now, or is that just something that you don't know much about?
So schools that have met standard or have not, I guess, if you're a site, regardless of the kind of site, and you have not met standard, there's probably still an issue with that site being high opportunity. So it's probably still going to be something that of concern for us. As far as the scoring criteria for educational excellence, I think we're still evolving a little bit more and trying to make sure that we're incentivizing the right populations for the properties that we're serving.
But still, it's because of 3311, I don't think there's been any talk recently of accepting supportive housing or senior housing for having to compete for those 5 points.
Right.
We would have to provide some sort of alternative if we were going to do that,
Yeah.
Right, which we tried last year and then,
At the
and
last minute.
failed.
Part of the last minute.
And failed
It
miserably.
didn't work. Yes.
Any discussion on changes to bond finance transactions, in particular existing section and intersection 42? Any changes coming, anything that's on the horizon here?
Okay.
You mean from TDHCA?
Yeah, I guess.
I know from the U.S. Congress that we hope to have a set 4% rate for the credit, but
As far as like threshold items or things that are,
Well, the threshold for the tax credit would be the same threshold
Yeah,
for
so
the
like the
4%.
Chapter 10, yeah, those, like the undesirable neighborhood stuff and the undesirable site, we're taking a look at right now and trying to get to some meaningful measurements that we can, point to an expert. The measurements that are there right now, some of them we're not really sure why they're there. So we're working on that. There are some other Chapter 10 changes that are coming, but that's not just, that would be all sites, all fund sources.
And we're open to change. Those other chapters don't change nearly as much as the QAP, as the scoring criteria. And so we spent a lot of time kind of fixated on the scoring criteria because that gets everybody excited. But obviously, if there are changes that things that haven't been working for you on threshold, regardless if it's a bond transaction or if 9%, bring those things to our attention so we can get them, looked at and considered.
okay. If you have any final remarks here?
I want to reserve because it sounds like you're going to say something big that I need to respond to.
No, actually, this is going to come as a shock to you, because I'm actually going to thank you, and
Wait for it.
but mainly Marnie, because I believe that the roundtables have gone a long ways toward getting us toward a more viable QAP before we say, where the hell did this come from?
Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you very much for doing that.
Yeah.
And Janine is doing a yeoman's job as our QAP chair in TAP and working hard with these folks, sometimes too hard as far as they're concerned. But, the back and forth, there is a lot of back and forth, but it's all to make the program better. So thank you all very much, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you.